Hello everyone. Welcome back to Life Story 999, where we share stories that inspire, bring justice, and sometimes reveal the unexpected kindness in people. Today, we have an incredible story about resilience, compassion, and how one act of humanity can turn a dire situation into a heartwarming victory. You won't want to miss this one. If you've ever felt helpless in a situation because of rigid rules or technology that seemed impossible to navigate, this story will resonate with you. It's about how a simple gesture can restore hope, even when everything seems stacked against you. It reminds us that compassion and community can be more powerful than any policy. In today's story, a man named Walter Jenkins faces a struggle that will leave you both heartbroken and uplifted. But just when hope seems lost, an unexpected hero steps in, proving that there is still good in the world and that one person truly can make a difference. The way this story unfolds is going to leave you inspired and remind you why it's so important to stand up for others. And at the end of our story, we want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where it felt like the system failed you and someone stepped in to help? What would you do if someone close to you was in the same position as Walter? Please share your thoughts in the comments or drop us an email. We love hearing your stories of resilience, courage, and the unexpected kindness that changes everything. Now, let's dive right in and see what happens when someone decides to stand up for what's right. Walter Jenkins, a gentle, 78-year-old retired coach, stepped into First Horizon Bank with a heart heavy with worry. For 40 years, he had been a loyal customer, always greeted by familiar faces and treated with warmth. Today, however, things were different. The warm, friendly atmosphere had been replaced by cold, rigid procedures. He wasn't here for much. Just a small withdrawal to cover the cost of his wife Emma's new cancer medication, a prescription that needed to be filled by the end of the day. Emma, his beloved wife of more than 50 years, was at home, resting after another exhausting round of chemotherapy. Walter had always been her rock, her steadfast support through everything. But as he approached the counter, he felt a sinking dread that perhaps this time, he might not be able to help her the way she needed. Walter shuffled up to the counter, his wooden cane tapping softly against the polished floor. In his other hand, he clutched a bundle of old documents, bank statements, his veteran's ID, a letter from Social Security. His frail fingers trembled slightly as he handed the papers to the teller. "Please," he said, his voice edged with anxiety. "I've been coming here for decades. I just need to withdraw from my pension." The young teller glanced at the bundle of papers, her expression impatient. "Sir, as I've explained before, we can't access your account without digital verification. You need a smartphone with the bank's app, digital ID, and biometric data. These are the new rules since the merger." Walter's heart sank further. He didn't own a smartphone, just an old flip phone that he and Emma shared. A simple device, enough for calls and emergencies. He had tried to keep up with technology, but it all felt overwhelming. He looked at the teller, his eyes beginning to glisten with tears. "I don't have a smartphone. Please, my wife is sick. I just need this money to get her medicine." But the teller shook her head, her eyes darting around, as if to avoid Walter's pleading gaze. "I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing I can do without the digital verification." Walter could feel the eyes of other customers on him as the teller picked up her phone and called for security. He tried to argue, to explain, but his voice cracked, the desperation overwhelming him. Within minutes, 2 security guards approached, their expressions stern. "Sir, you need to leave," one of them said firmly, taking Walter by the arm. His bundle of papers slipped from his grasp, scattering across the polished floor. He watched helplessly as the guards began to escort him out, the murmurs of the other customers echoing around him. Some expressed sympathy, while others just looked away, uncomfortable. Walter's legs felt weak as he was guided outside. He was gently pushed onto a bench by the entrance, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He looked down at his trembling hands, feeling the tears start to fall, unrestrained this time. He had never felt so powerless. He had spent his whole life helping others, coaching kids, serving in the military, supporting his community. And yet, in his moment of need, he felt utterly abandoned. The pharmacy would close in just 2 hours. Emma needed that medication. Walter tried to think of what to do next, but his mind felt blank. He had always been able to solve problems, to figure things out. But now, the world had changed. It had moved on without people like him. People who couldn't keep up with all the new technology, all the new rules. Walter sat there, staring at the pavement, his thoughts a jumble of worry and despair. He imagined Emma waiting at home, her hopeful eyes looking at him as he walked through the door. He couldn't bear the thought of letting her down. The pain in his chest grew sharper, the weight of his helplessness bearing down on him. Around him, people walked past, some giving him sympathetic looks, others barely noticing. The bustling world moved on, indifferent to his suffering. He felt a growing sense of isolation, as though the world had built a wall around him that he couldn't break through. After a while, Walter wiped his tears with the back of his hand and looked at his scattered documents on the ground. Slowly, he bent down, picking up the papers one by one. Each one was a reminder of the life he had built. Decades of careful savings, service records, bank statements from years past. All those years seemed to mean nothing now. He sighed deeply, his frail body shivering slightly in the cold breeze. He tried to gather his thoughts, to find some way to solve this impossible problem. He needed to get home to Emma. He couldn't let her down. Not now, not when she needed him most. But without the money, he felt trapped, without any options left. Walter closed his eyes, trying to think. Maybe he could call a neighbor for help, or perhaps one of Emma's old friends. But that thought made him feel even worse. He had always been the one people came to for help. Now, at his lowest, he had no choice but to rely on the kindness of others. He let out a shaky breath and opened his eyes, staring at the people walking by. He wondered if anyone would care, if anyone would notice that he was struggling. He hoped, somewhere deep down, that maybe, just maybe, someone would see him and help. The clock was ticking, and the pharmacy's closing time loomed closer. Walter clenched his cane, his knuckles white, and looked out at the bustling street. He had no idea what to do next, but he knew he couldn't give up. Not for Emma. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, feeling more alone than ever, he heard a voice, a gentle, yet strong voice that cut through the noise of the street. "Sir, are you all right?" Walter looked up, squinting against the sun, and saw a tall figure standing before him. There was something about the man's presence, a warmth, a genuine concern, that made Walter's heart lift just a little. I'm not all right," Walter managed, his voice trembling. The stranger knelt down, his face kind and patient. "Let's see what we can do to help," he said, offering Walter his hand. And for the first time that day, Walter felt a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, Shaquille Harris, an NBA legend known for his towering height and even larger heart, was driving by the bank with his teenage granddaughter, Maya. They were on their way to grab lunch when Maya noticed Walter sitting on the bench, his shoulders slumped, sobbing quietly. "Grandpa, stop the car," she urged, her voice filled with concern. "That man looks like he needs help." Shaquille pulled over, his heart aching at the sight. He knew what it was like to feel helpless. He had seen his own mother struggle to navigate bureaucracy when he was a child. The sight of the elderly man broke his heart. It reminded him of the times his family had faced challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. He turned off the ignition and stepped out of the car, his massive frame instantly drawing attention. Maya followed closely behind. They approached the bench where Walter sat, and Shaquille's presence cast a long shadow. He spoke gently, trying not to startle the distressed man. "Sir, are you all right?" Shaquille asked, his voice a soft rumble, despite his imposing figure. Walter looked up, startled at first, but the concern in Shaquille's eyes eased his fear. Walter's eyes were red and swollen from crying. I can't get my money. My wife needs her medicine, and they won't let me withdraw it without some smartphone app." His voice broke, and Shaquille could hear the raw desperation and helplessness behind the words. Maya knelt beside Walter, already gathering the scattered papers around his feet. She glanced at the old documents, worn bank statements, a veteran's ID, a letter from Social Security, and faded photographs. She saw the story of a man who had lived a life of service and care. "Grandpa," Maya said, looking up at Shaquille, her young eyes wide with sympathy, "he's a veteran. And look, He used to coach basketball. Shaquille's eyes widened as he studied Walter more closely. Recognition flashed across his face. Coach Jenkins? You coached at Lincoln High, right? Shaquille asked, his voice tinged with astonishment. Walter blinked, surprised that anyone still remembered him. He nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. You taught my friend Marcus, Shaquille continued, his face breaking into a warm smile. He always said you were the reason he stayed out of trouble. You gave him a chance when no one else would. Walter smiled weakly, the faintest glimmer of pride shining through his exhaustion. Marcus, yes, I remember him. He was a good kid, Walter replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Shaquille's heart ached as he looked down at Walter. This was a man who had given so much to his community, only to be discarded when he needed help the most. He knew he couldn't just walk away. He extended his hand to Walter, helping the older man to his feet. Come on, coach, Shaquille said, his voice filled with determination. We're going back in there. Sometimes people forget that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. Maya smiled up at her grandfather, her admiration clear. She knew her grandfather had a big heart, but seeing him step in like this filled her with pride. She picked up the rest of Walter's documents and hurried to catch up as Shaquille led Walter back toward the bank's entrance. The bank lobby went quiet as Shaquille, Walter, and Maya entered. Shaquille's towering presence was impossible to ignore, and the security guards who had escorted Walter out moments before exchanged uneasy glances. Rebecca Thompson, the bank manager, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening at the sight of the NBA legend walking towards her with Walter. Excuse me, miss. Shaquille's voice boomed across the quiet lobby, catching everyone's attention. I think we need to have a conversation about what it means to serve the people in this community. Rebecca stood, her face flushed with surprise. She straightened her blazer and walked around her desk, trying to maintain her composure. Mr. Harris, she began, her voice professional, though her unease was evident. We have regulations we must follow. Federal guidelines require digital verification for withdrawals. Shaquille held up his hand, cutting her off. I understand guidelines and regulations, Miss Thompson, but this man has been banking here for 40 years. He served this community, coached kids, helped them stay on the right path. And now, when he needs help, you're telling me there's nothing you can do because he doesn't have a smartphone? Rebecca hesitated, her eyes flickering towards the security guards, then to the crowd of onlookers gathering around the lobby, their phones out, recording. She swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. Shaquille wasn't just anyone. He was a public figure, someone whose influence could make or break reputations. Maya stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. You know, banking is supposed to be about trust. My grandpa always says that if we can't take care of our elders, then we're failing as a society. Mr. Jenkins deserves better than this. Shaquille nodded in agreement, his eyes still locked on Rebecca's. This man is trying to get medicine for his wife. The least we can do is find a way to help him today. His voice softened, but the intensity remained. Rules should be about protecting people, not making their lives harder. Rebecca's resolve began to falter. She could see the compassion in Shaquille's eyes, the sincerity in Maya's. She knew she had a choice. Either stand firm on policy or do what she knew in her heart was right. She took a deep breath and nodded. All right, Mr. Jenkins, she said, her tone gentler now. Please come with me to my office. Let's see what we can do to help you today. The lobby erupted in applause as Rebecca led Walter back to her office. Walter looked over at Shaquille, his eyes filled with tears, not of despair this time, but of gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Shaquille patted his shoulder. You did a lot for people like Marcus. Now it's our turn to be there for you, coach. Maya beamed as she watched her grandfather and Walter. This was what real heroes did. They used their influence to help others, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. She pulled out her phone, taking a quick picture of the moment. She wanted to remember this. How her grandfather stood up for a stranger, how compassion won over bureaucracy. Inside Rebecca's office, Walter was finally able to withdraw the money he needed. Rebecca, her demeanor now entirely changed, apologized sincerely to Walter. "I'm so sorry for what you went through today. We'll be reviewing our policies to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Walter nodded, the relief washing over him as he clutched the envelope containing the money for Emma's medication. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice breaking. He looked at Shaquille and Maya, his heart full. "You have no idea what this means to me." Shaquille smiled, his eyes warm. "You just take care of your wife, coach. That's all the thanks we need." As they walked out of the bank together, Walter felt a renewed sense of hope. He had been ready to give up, but kindness, unexpected and powerful, had found him. Shaquille turned to Maya, a proud smile on his face. "Remember, Maya, it's not about how big you are or how much you have. It's about how you use what you have to help others." Maya nodded, her heart swelling with admiration. She knew she would carry this lesson with her for the rest of her life. The afternoon sun shone brightly as they walked back to Shaquille's car, Walter holding his head a little higher, the weight on his shoulders just a little lighter. It was a reminder to everyone watching. Sometimes, being a hero isn't about making headlines. Sometimes, it's just about being there when someone needs you the most. The trio walked back into the bank, Shaquille's presence impossible to ignore. The entire lobby fell silent as they entered. Rebecca Thompson, the bank manager, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening as she recognized Shaquille Harris, the celebrity presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. "Miss Thompson," Shaquille's voice boomed, "I think we need to have a conversation about what community banking means." Rebecca, caught off guard, straightened her blazer nervously. "Mr. Harris, there are federal regulations we have to follow." "Let me stop you there," Shaquille interrupted, his voice calm but authoritative. "I know about regulations. I sit on the board of several community initiatives and have worked with financial institutions before. But what I see here is a good man. A man who served his country and community, being treated like he's a nobody just because he doesn't have a smartphone." Rebecca glanced at the crowd gathering around the lobby, phones out, recording. Shaquille continued, "This man has been banking here for over 40 years. He coached kids, kept them out of trouble, made this community better. And now, when he needs help the most, you turn him away?" Rebecca hesitated. She could see the growing discontent among the customers. She knew that one wrong move here could mean a PR nightmare. Shaquille's granddaughter, Maya, spoke up, her voice filled with the conviction of youth. "Isn't banking supposed to be about helping people? If the system's broken, shouldn't we fix it, instead of making people suffer?" Rebecca's resolve wavered. She looked at Walter, then back at Shaquille. Finally, she sighed. "All right, Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice softening. "Let's get you what you need." She motioned for Walter to come back to her office. "We'll use the emergency override protocol. I'll take responsibility." The lobby erupted in applause, customers cheering as Walter was finally allowed back in. Tears filled his eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. Rebecca led Walter into her office, followed by Shaquille and Maya. The office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the outdated documents Walter carried with him. Rebecca sat behind her desk, her demeanor more considerate now. She pulled up Walter's account on her computer and began the process of authorizing the withdrawal manually. Walter watched, his hands trembling slightly as he held onto his veteran ID and the letter from Social Security. He couldn't believe the turn of events. Just moments ago, he had felt utterly defeated, yet now he was sitting in the manager's office with the promise of getting the help he needed. "Mr. Jenkins," Rebecca began, her voice softer now, "I truly apologize for the inconvenience you faced today. We have protocols in place to protect our customers, but sometimes we forget the human side of things. I want you to know that we'll be reviewing these policies." She glanced up at Shaquille, who nodded in approval, his stern expression softening. Shaquille leaned forward, his large hands resting on the edge of Rebecca's desk. "That's all we're asking for, Miss Thompson. Some humanity. People like Walter have given everything to their communities, and they deserve better." Rebecca nodded, a hint of remorse in her eyes. She continued processing the withdrawal, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. Walter could see the screen displaying his account information, years of careful savings, every deposit and withdrawal a testament to a life of hard work and dedication. As Rebecca finalized the transaction, she printed out a receipt and handed it to Walter, along with the cash he needed. "Here you go, Mr. Jenkins. I hope this helps, and again, I'm truly sorry for the trouble." Walter took the envelope of cash, his eyes welling up once more. He looked at Rebecca, then at Shaquille and Maya. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Maya smiled, her youthful optimism shining through. "We're just glad we could help, Mr. Jenkins. My grandpa always says that if you can help, you should." Shaquille stood, offering his hand to Rebecca. "Thank you for doing the right thing," he said, his voice sincere. "I know it wasn't easy, but it's moments like these that make all the difference." Rebecca shook his hand, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I appreciate you reminding us of what really matters." With the transaction complete, the trio made their way back out to the lobby. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, but not before offering Walter smiles and words of encouragement. Some even patted Shaquille on the back, thanking him for stepping in. As they stepped outside, the sun was beginning to dip in the sky, casting a warm glow over the street. Walter looked at Shaquille and Maya, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You two are angels, I swear," he said, his voice breaking. "Emma, she'll be so relieved." Shaquille placed a comforting hand on Walter's shoulder. "You just take care of her, coach. That's all that matters." Maya, her eyes bright, looked up at Walter. "And remember, Mr. Jenkins, if you ever need help again, don't hesitate to ask. Sometimes, the world just needs a reminder that we're all in this together." Walter nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He felt a renewed sense of hope, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that there were still challenges ahead, but for now, he had what he needed. And more importantly, he knew he wasn't alone. As they walked back to Shaquille's car, Maya turned to her grandfather, her voice filled with admiration. "Grandpa, you always know what to do. How did you know they'd listen?" Shaquille chuckled, a deep, warm sound. "I didn't know, sweetheart, but I knew we had to try. Sometimes, people just need a little push to see what's right. And sometimes we have to be that push." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She knew this was a day she would never forget, a day when she saw her grandfather use his influence not for fame or fortune, but to help someone in need. It was a lesson she knew she'd carry with her for the rest of her life. As they drove away, Walter waved to them, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Shaquille glanced back, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He knew they had done something important today, something that went beyond just helping one man. They had reminded everyone watching that compassion and community were more powerful than any policy or regulation. The drive home was filled with a comfortable silence, the kind that comes after a meaningful victory. Maya looked out the window, her mind replaying the events of the day. She turned to her grandfather, her voice soft. "Grandpa, do you think people will change after seeing what happened today?" Shaquille smiled, his eyes on the road. "I think so, Maya. Change starts with moments like this. It starts when people see others standing up for what's right. And as long as we keep standing up, others will too." Maya nodded, her heart full. She knew that, no matter what, she wanted to be someone who stood up for others, just like her grandfather. And as the sun set on their drive home, she felt hopeful for the future, knowing that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that changed the world. As Rebecca processed the withdrawal, Walter found himself relaxing for the first time that day. The tension that had gripped his body for hours seemed to ease, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. He glanced at Shaquille and Maya, who stood beside him, their presence a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone in this struggle. Walter swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to repay you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Shaquille shook his head, a gentle smile forming on his lips. "You don't need to repay me, coach. You've already done your part by being there for kids like Marcus. Now it's our turn to be here for you." His voice was steady, filled with warmth and sincerity. Rebecca handed Walter the envelope of cash, her entire demeanor transformed. The The cold, rigid bank manager had softened, replaced by a woman who had remembered what it meant to care. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her tone earnest, "I'm truly sorry for what happened today. We will be reviewing our policies to make sure no one else has to go through this. It shouldn't have taken all of this for us to do the right thing." Walter nodded, his eyes glistening as he accepted the envelope. It wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the compassion behind it. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. He turned to Shaquille and Maya, his gratitude overflowing. "You both have given me more than just help today. You've given me hope." Before they left, Shaquille paused, as if struck by a sudden thought. He made his way to the nearby ATM, withdrawing a few $100s without hesitation. Returning to Walter, he pressed the crisp bills into his hand. "For Emma," Shaquille said, his deep voice gentle. Walter tried to refuse, but Shaquille insisted. "Please, Coach, consider it a thank you for everything you've done for this community. You may not realize it, but your influence lasts much longer than you think." Walter was overwhelmed. His eyes filled with tears he could no longer hold back. "Thank you," he whispered again, barely able to speak. The kindness that Shaquille and Maya had shown him was almost too much to comprehend. Maya stepped closer, her young face bright with sincerity. "Mr. Jenkins, we're just glad we could help. And don't worry, my grandpa is right. People like you are the reason this community is what it is. You've inspired so many, and it's our turn to give back." Rebecca watched the exchange, her own heart touched by the raw humanity in front of her. She had started her day like any other, focused on efficiency and protocols, but now she was reminded of what truly mattered, the people behind the policies. She cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Mr. Jenkins, I want to make sure this never happens again. We're going to reassess how we treat our customers, especially those who have been with us for as long as you have. You deserve better." Walter nodded, the weight of what had transpired still settling on him. "Thank you, Miss Thompson," he said, his voice steadying. "I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot to know that someone is listening." Shaquille patted Walter gently on the shoulder. "All right, Coach, let's get you home to Emma. She needs you now more than ever." Walter smiled, the exhaustion of the day evident in his eyes. But there was something else too, a light, a renewed determination. He had come into the bank feeling utterly defeated, but now he was leaving with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. As they walked through the bank's lobby, the crowd that had gathered began to disperse, but not before offering Walter words of support and encouragement. Some even approached Shaquille, shaking his hand, thanking him for stepping in. One elderly woman, her voice trembling, said, "Thank you for reminding us all what it means to be part of a community." Maya watched, her heart swelling with pride. She knew her grandfather was a special person, but today, she had witnessed just how powerful one person's actions could be. As they stepped outside, the cool afternoon air greeted them, the sun dipping toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over everything. Walter turned to Shaquille and Maya, his voice still filled with emotion. "You two are truly angels," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Emma, she'll be so relieved. I can't thank you enough." Shaquille smiled, his hand resting on Walter's shoulder. "You don't need to thank us, Coach. You just focus on taking care of Emma. That's all that matters right now." Maya nodded in agreement. "And remember, Mr. Jenkins, if you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask. We're all in this together, and we have to look out for each other." Walter's eyes welled up again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. He nodded, unable to speak. He knew he wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. As they walked toward Shaquille's car, Maya looked up at her grandfather, her eyes shining with admiration. "Grandpa, you always know what to do. How did you know they would listen?" Shaquille chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to lighten the weight of the day. "I didn't know for sure, sweetheart, but I knew we had to try. Sometimes, people just need a reminder of what's right. And sometimes, we have to be that reminder." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She knew this day would stay with her forever. A day when she saw her grandfather use his influence not for personal gain, but to make a difference in someone else's life. It was a lesson she would carry with her always. The ride back to Walter's home was quiet, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that follows a meaningful victory. Walter looked out the window, watching the streets of his community pass by, feeling a renewed connection to the place he had called home for so many years. He glanced over at Shaquille and Maya, feeling an immense sense of gratitude. They had not only given him the means to help Emma, but had also restored his faith in people. When they arrived at Walter's modest home, Shaquille and Maya helped him to the door. Walter turned to them, his eyes glistening once more. "I hope one day I can repay you, even if just a little. You've done more for me today than I could ever ask." Shaquille shook his head, smiling. "You've already repaid us, coach. Just keep being the person you are. That's more than enough." He reached out and gave Walter a firm handshake, the kind that communicated more than words ever could. Maya hugged Walter, her arms wrapping around his frail frame. "Take care, Mr. Jenkins, and give Emma our love." Walter nodded, his heart full as he watched them leave. He turned to his front door, a renewed sense of purpose in his step. He was going to take care of Emma, and he was going to do it with the love and support of the community behind him. As Shaquille and Maya drove away, Maya looked at her grandfather, her heart full. "Grandpa, do you think what happened today will change things? Will people remember to care more about each other?" Shaquille smiled, his eyes on the road ahead. "I think so, Maya. Change starts with moments like these. It starts when people see others standing up for what's right. And as long as we keep standing up, others will too." Maya nodded, her heart swelling with hope. She knew that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that changed the world. And as they drove into the setting sun, she felt proud to be part of that change, knowing that, together, they had made a difference, one small act of humanity at a time. As Shaquille, Maya, and Walter walked out of the bank, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the scene. Walter felt a weight lifted off his shoulders, a sense of hope restored. He looked at Shaquille, his heart full. "You know," he said, "people like you make me believe in the good in this world." Shaquille smiled, his large hand resting on Walter's shoulder. "We all have to look out for each other, coach. That's what makes a community." Maya, still holding her phone, looked up at her grandfather. "Grandpa, can we share this story? People need to know that kindness still exists." Shaquille nodded. "Absolutely. People need to be reminded that behind every policy, every rule, there's a person. And sometimes, those people just need a little help." Walter nodded in agreement, his heart swelling with gratitude. The warmth of the setting sun seemed to mirror the warmth he felt inside. After everything that had happened that day, he realized that hope wasn't gone. It just needed a little nudge to shine through again. As they stood there, a few bystanders who had watched the events unfold approached them, some with smiles, others with words of encouragement. One man, who looked to be in his 40s, patted Walter on the back. "You deserve this, sir. You remind us all of what's important." Walter smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie that had been missing for so long. "Thank you," he replied, his voice soft but filled with emotion. Maya recorded the moment on her phone, capturing the genuine smiles and shared sense of humanity. She knew how powerful this story could be, a reminder to the world that kindness and compassion still mattered, perhaps more than ever. "We need to show people," she said, looking up at her grandfather, "that no matter how complicated things get, there's always room for kindness." Shaquille nodded, his eyes reflecting pride as he looked at his granddaughter. "That's right, Maya. It's not about the size of the gesture. It's about the intention behind it. If we can inspire just one person to do something good, then it's all worth it." They helped Walter to Shaquille's car, and as they drove back to Walter's home, there was a comfortable silence, the kind that follows a long, emotionally charged day. Walter gazed out the window, watching as the streets of his neighborhood passed by. He saw children playing, people chatting, and the world continuing in its everyday rhythm. But to him, everything seemed a bit brighter, as if a veil had been lifted. Walter turned to Shaquille, his voice breaking the silence. "You know, Shaquille, I always try to teach my players about more than just basketball. It was always about life, about being there for each other. What you and Maya did for me today, It showed me that those lessons aren't forgotten. Shaquille smiled, glancing at Walter from the driver's seat. Coach, those lessons live on in the people you've touched. What you did for Marcus and all the other kids. You created a ripple effect. Today, we were just lucky enough to be able to give back. Maya, sitting in the back seat, spoke up. And now we get to keep that ripple going. Maybe someone who saw us today will help someone else tomorrow. She smiled at Walter, her youthful optimism contagious. That's how we make the world better, right? One small act at a time. When they reached Walter's home, Shaquille and Maya helped him out of the car and up to his front door. The small, cozy house looked warm and inviting, and Walter could already picture Emma's relieved smile when he walked through the door. He turned to Shaquille and Maya, his eyes once again misty with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made a difference in my life today, and I promise, I'll never forget it." Shaquille took Walter's hand in both of his, giving it a firm shake. "Just take care of Emma, Coach. That's all the thanks we need." He smiled, his gaze unwavering. "And remember, you're not alone. We're all part of this community, and we'll always be here for each other." Maya stepped forward and hugged Walter gently, her small frame dwarfed by the elderly man. "Take care, Mr. Jenkins, and tell Emma we're thinking of her." Walter nodded, his heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. "I will, sweetheart. You two take care as well." He turned and opened the door, pausing for a moment to look back at them. "The world needs more people like you," he said softly, before disappearing inside. As Shaquille and Maya walked back to the car, Maya turned to her grandfather, her face serious. "Grandpa, do you think people will remember this? Will it change anything?" Shaquille looked down at his granddaughter, his eyes filled with warmth. "I think so, Maya. Change doesn't always happen in big ways. Sometimes it's just a seed that gets planted, and it grows slowly over time. What matters is that we plant those seeds. Show people that there's a better way to treat each other." Maya nodded thoughtfully, her young mind processing the day's events. She knew her grandfather was right. It wasn't always about making a huge impact all at once. It was about the small things, the acts of kindness that added up to something greater. As they drove away, Maya pulled out her phone and began typing, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. She was crafting a post for their social media account, sharing Walter's story, the story of a man who needed help and of the community that stood up for him. She wanted people to see it, to remember that even in a world that sometimes felt disconnected, there were still moments of genuine connection. To all our viewers, Maya said aloud as she typed, "Thank you for joining us today. What would you have done in this situation? Should the bank have made an exception from the start?" Share your thoughts in the comments below or email us. We love hearing your opinions and your own stories of resilience and kindness. Shaquille smiled as he listened to his granddaughter. He felt proud, not just of what they had done that day, but of the person Maya was becoming. She was learning that the true measure of success wasn't in accolades or wealth, but in the positive impact you had on others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a gentle twilight, Maya finished her post, adding a final line. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Story 999 for more stories that touch the heart and remind us of the power of community. See you in the next video, and remember, even the smallest acts of kindness can make the biggest difference. She hit post, and the story went live. A beacon of hope in a world that often needed reminders of the good that existed. As they drove on, Shaquille looked at his granddaughter, his heart swelling with pride and hope for the future. He knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, the world would always have a chance to become a better place, one act of kindness at a time.